Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trad Tasman Talk, back at the old traditional time of 7 p.m. Tuesdays, Melbourne time. I'm Tim Wilms, Editor-in-Chief of The Unshackled.
And I am Dieuwe, Editor-in-Chief of Right Minds NZ. And it is 9 p.m. here in Auckland, and we are indeed back at the old time slot, Trad Tuesdays. 9 p.m. here for us, and it's been a while since we've done a Tuesday show. So you were busy last Friday, I'm busy this Friday, and I think we were just talking about doing another show next Tuesday as well, probably, and then we'll go back to Fridays. So thank you to everyone who is joining us live on this Tuesday night. We will be back, it will be Tuesday for the next little while.
Our last Friday and this Friday will be, well, to utilize a familiar saying, they're a bit of Freaky Fridays, so that's why we're Trad Tuesday, and my camera has a malfunction, so I'll let you take over while I fix that.
Go for it. I will lead on. We are, as stated, live on the Unshackled channel, live on the Right Minds YouTube channel, and it will be good to get everybody into the chat. I'm seeing a few of you there already, and have been some interesting developments in New Zealand the last little while. So when we did our last Friday show, we were talking about New Zealand switching back down to level 1, and that actually happened on last Monday. So we basically eradicated coronavirus. It was all gone, and I was going to talk about how it was so great. New Zealand has eradicated coronavirus and it's gone. And then at 1 p.m. today, it was announced that we have 2 new cases. So it's returned. So after 24 days, it's arrived. The second wave arrived. Came over from England. It was let in again at the borders, just like the first time. Our totally secure borders that Jacinda assures us are completely under control, and 2 cases slipped through. They let them out of quarantine early. There are still a lot of details slowly being revealed about this, but it seems like, it was British nationals who were allowed in for compassionate grounds to attend a funeral, and they were let out to attend this funeral, and they flew on a plane as well, I believe, a domestic flight. So it's going to be quite interesting to see where this goes over the next few days. It was kind of interesting because I was on the side of, eradicating a virus sounds like is likely an impossible task, and it's sort of been admitted now, which the Prime Minister has come out and said, it was always going to be, we were always going to be alert, we were always going to have more cases, we've got to stay on top of it. So we're permanently at alert level 1, which in the one of my favorite conservative commentators, Mark Stein, always talks about this in America, orange alert, that they've been on since 9/11. So for the past 20 years, we've been on orange alert for terrorism. Now we're going to forever be on level 1 for coronavirus, and we must always be vigilant and be ready to whenever the second wave, and in the future the third wave and the fourth wave and the fifth wave and so on is accidentally let into the country.
You're right that the original alert levels and colors were for Islamic terror alerts in the early 2000s. We also adopted it for our bushfire alert system, and then we at the Unshackled, we created a triggering alert system, which, well, I think the past couple of weeks the risk of triggering has been at the extreme severe. I can't remember which one is the highest, but yes, now we have I guess the coronavirus, or just a pandemic alertness system. Which are all designed, all these alert systems, to keep us in fear.
Well, that's pretty much it, right? It will be a perpetual level 1 now. It's clear. People are asking, what about level 1? What about level 0? But it seems that now we do have the full confirmation that we are going to be in the eternal level 1. So just like you today, 20 years on from 9/11, are still shuffling barefoot through the airport, and you're still subject to random checks, and so on. It's going to be like that with sort of coronavirus version. Essentially the establishment of entire new layers of government to deal with a temporary problem. And in the words of Ronald Reagan, there is no, or was it Margaret Thatcher? There is no. I believe it was Reagan. There is no nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
Well, that's also what Milton Friedman said, and as I mentioned, I think I mentioned it on Wilmsfront, not on this program, but Robert Higgs, his classic book, Crisis and Leviathan, when there is a crisis in a nation, the governments, the powers of the state, they ratcheted it up. He came up with the term the ratchet effect. He wrote that book in 1987, and it's classic even today. And well, governments basically use what he wrote. It wasn't meant to be an instruction manual like another book. It was meant to be a critique of governments using crisis to expand.
And last week we had a sort of a more economic fallout. We had the Warehouse, which is a seller of the cheap Chinese junk here in New Zealand, one of the cheap places where you can get everything from toys to clothes to any kind of household goods. And they announced, on top of other layoffs that we've detailed in the show before, they're laying off 1,000 more staff members. And other businesses are continuing to cut costs, and they were caught up in the coronavirus restrictions. So they were secretly lobbying the government, like all of these other large monopolies, to be allowed to remain open during level 4. And they jumped the gun and announced too early that they were staying open, and then they got roped back and were shut down. And so now there was the case of, okay, well, they're now firing staff because of the losses that they suffered for about 6 to 8 weeks where they couldn't operate properly. And when asked about this in an interview, Jacinda Ardern mentioned that she felt angry that they were firing their staff. So now we have our Prime Minister being upset with businesses for failing during her lockdown.
It's like shooting someone in both legs and saying, "How come you can't walk?"
Yeah. And that is we're going to be seeing. We're very sadly going to be seeing a lot more of that in New Zealand. But on the upside, there have been a lot of jokes today now that we're going back to level 3 and 4. I don't see that as being likely. Whatever happens with coronavirus, I suspect that the any kind of lockdown is now viewed as too costly, which is something that we mentioned 3, 4, 5 months ago whenever we started talking about this. So that's the case in New Zealand now. Things were looking good until today, and probably because we were holding this special show, suddenly, I needed something to talk about, and here we go.
That seems to happen whenever we have a show in the evening. There's always a whole bunch of news in the mornings and afternoons, and so we've got plenty to talk about during the evening. I assume with alert level 1, because I saw the crowds, the Super Rugby Orata returned on the weekend, and
Aotearoa.
Aotearoa.
Well, you can say it like a real foreigner. It's was it Aotearoa or something?
Aotearoa. That sounds easier to pronounce.
Just try that. Yeah.
I noticed that Americans, they pronounce Australia as Australia. They emphasize the os. Well, Australians, they just tend to say Australia.
Exactly.
But yeah, the stadium was filled to capacity at Eden Park in Auckland. Obviously, There's no social distancing requirements anymore if they're all sandwiched there for 2 hours.
Yeah, they haven't. We had the Black Lives Matters protest that sort of smashed the remaining level 2 restrictions. And then they had some more protests that weekend as well. So they had several thousand people protesting for Black Lives, and then they had 50,000 people watching rugby. So you can tell which which kind of cultural activity is more important here in New Zealand at the moment?
Well, we had a spike in numbers over the past 24 hours because, well, this is what the media says. Like, I jokingly call 2 new cases a second wave. And this is what our mainstream media does. We had a massive spike of 15 new cases in the past 24 hours, though our active cases are now under 400. It had been under 500 for around about a week. Now it's under 400 now. And of course, it's in the People's Democratic Socialist Corrupt Republic of Victoria now, where most of the new cases seem to be. It was 12 of the 15 new cases in the past 24 hours from Victoria. There's a cluster in a family in the north. A few schools have had to be closed because the students have got it. So they've had to be closed for deep cleaning. They treat... If somebody is working or being educated somewhere and catch coronavirus, they treat it like it's some sort of anthrax outbreak, and they need to have a full lockdown and isolation, even though we haven't had a death for, it feels like nearly a month now. So we're sort of at the stage now of, it feels like herd immunity.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what's happened to the numbers in Sweden, but last time we had a show, the UK was still rocketing on beyond everybody else. Spain and Italy and Sweden were all kind of up there. And there's there does not appear to be a huge amount of evidence that simply locking everybody in their house is actually that effective. Obviously, in terms of what New Zealand did by actually locking people in their houses for several months, worked okay. But that you can't keep doing that, right?
Well, you can only do it once. You can only destroy your economy once.
Yeah, that's right. There is only one. Before we move on to the next subject, we've got a few super chats, and it's worth mentioning that the Unshackled channel is monetized, not the Right Minds one. So if you would like to send through a super chat for us to read out, go there. And the first one is from your best friend, I think.
Yes, Senator Slayer. He's a big fan of all Unshackled productions. He's sent through Australian $2.99. He said, Peter Grace blackbirded Aboriginal musicians. Yes, this term blackbirding has come into focus this past week because our Prime Minister Scott Morrison said that Australia never had slavery, and a lot of the, or you'd say, black armband historians have come out and said, oh, well, but what about blackbirding, which was a form of slavery where they used Aboriginals and Pacific Islanders for cheap labor. And Senator Slayer is referring to how Peter Grace filmed some music documentaries featuring Aboriginal musicians, and I assume didn't pay them.
It's I'm sure he's a male feminist as well. Mm-hmm. And we actually have a similar story in New Zealand, and it's going to come up later in the show about us. We don't really have a name for it in New Zealand. We just call it slavery instead of blackbirding. Australians like to really come up with silly names for everything.
We also had convict white labor, which is a form of slavery. We can't talk about that
as well.
Like which was basically, and a lot of these convicts, they weren't rapists and murderers, stole a loaf of bread.
Exactly.
I remember when I
got deported to Australia.
Yeah, I remember because me and my family lived in Tasmania for 5 years during my childhood. We used to frequent the Port Arthur historical site, and the information centre had all lists of all the convicts sent there, and some were there for lewd conduct, for sleeping with a senior figure's wife. A few were in there for buggery, like victimless crimes. You could say they were immoral, but they were forced to work in a penal colony, slavery.
Have you demanded your reparations yet? And does the pain of your ancestors being shipped to Australia keep you up at night, Tim?
Well, I'm not. I can't understand why the Irish Australians, they probably have the biggest grievance. James Fox Higgins, who is on the Uncockables and runs Rational Rise TV, he's of Irish background. His people were they were treated worse than some countries of
Yeah.
color.
Absolutely. And Jacinda Ardern got in trouble the last few days because she announced that New Zealand is not going to tolerate racism, and that New Zealand has always stood against racism. And that was very upsetting to many members of the left, because New Zealand is, of course, a racist country that is founded on racism and has had hundreds of years of racism. And so for the Prime Minister to say that New Zealand has always been against racism is the worst form of gaslighting. And she has fallen out of favor, even though she's just saved millions of lives in New Zealand from coronavirus. She is in hot water.
Did she also say that cancer is bad as well, and New Zealand stands against cancer?
Not yet.
Okay, well, how do we know that? Because we only knew this week that she was against racism.
We know that she is prioritizing cancer treatments for Pacifica and Maori people. So we could infer it, even though she hasn't outright said it. So I think we do have to give her a pass on that one. We've got another super chat here from Senator Slayer again, and he did say, "I love that Marge has converted to Mormonism," and I believe that's Margaret Court, right? Or is
No, this
Margaret?
is Margot Rains.
Oh, Margot. Oh, okay.
She's
I thought this was a joke
the official moderator of all Unshackled produced shows. So she's a moderator here on the Wilmsfront channel and also on the Uncockables channel as well.
I see her in the chat now. Very good. Okay. I thought this was something I was out of the loop for, and indeed I was.
Yeah, you miss so many in jokes in the Unshackled chat. It's half the fun.
It's because you Australians do things at like 10 p.m. at night in Australia, which is like 1 o'clock in the morning for me.
You've got all squares in your Right Minds chat. They all pick it if you get something slightly wrong or mispronounced. They're all well, it's not really expression negative Nancy anymore. It's negative Karen.
Yeah, my chat does a very good job of keeping me in line, definitely. It's all a little bit more chaotic in yours.
And we've got another super chat from, I've never seen this account before, I ate Upsy, New Zealand $16.99. Thank you so much for that. You didn't post a message for me to read out. So if you want me to read out a statement from you, just put it further in the chat and I'll read it out.
Sounds very good.
So we'll stick on coronavirus for a little bit longer because National Cabinet on last Friday, there was agreement between all the state and territories that step 3 to a COVID-safe Australia will be extended to have a more relaxed restrictions. So there won't be venue capacity limits anymore. They'll adopt what was the initial restriction, so it's sort of back to the future, but back to a slightly less bad future. 1 person per 4 square meters. So in Victoria, we're still stuck at 20 people in any venue until June the 22nd. So we've got to wait another 6 days, and also June 22 is when the gyms and the cinemas can reopen, and you can go to the pub just for a drink. You don't have to buy food as well.
Have the pubs figured out like a way to tell people like 1 chip or something along with their drink, or is nobody playing funny games like that?
Well, it's business. It's not viable to sell 1 chip.
That's right. Capitalism, of course.
Yes.
We completely forgot about that the past few months. That people are supposed to be doing things and buying things.
We talked about the Super Rugby Otara. I probably said it wrong again. We had
Aotearoa.
Yeah.
Think about rower.
We finally had in Football Mad Melbourne the AFL return this weekend, but in empty stadiums. Fans will be allowed back in July. That's what the National Cabinet has agreed. And the state borders, the premiers have indicated, are slowly going to come down. The South Australian Liberal Premier, Stephen Marshall, said that he's going to open his state borders to West Australians, Northern Territorians and Tasmanians, but not to the eastern states, since they still have a lot of active cases before a full coming down of the border on July 20th. Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, she initially said that the New South Wales-Queensland border would be up until September. She's reneged on that, and it'll probably be July. The only holdout state looks like WA, because the West Australians, they love keeping out the Easterners, and the Premier, Mark McGowan, loves the approval rating of 90% for a hard border closure.
We do sort of have we're talking about rule by experts, but we really have sort of ended up by rule by opinion polling.
Well, the polls were good to the premiers during the lockdowns and containing the virus, but now, and this is certainly how I feel, it's the waiting game, especially in Victoria. When can we're counting down? Like, why can't you just open up, expand the capacity of the pubs now? Like, just because you extended the state of emergency until June 22 doesn't mean you have to go to the exact date. The AFL, it was a bittersweet return, obviously not having crowds there. They had the fake crowd noise like they did in the NRL return, but all the AFL players before the game took the knee to support Black Lives Matter. So it was like, we've been without AFL since March. We've been waiting for it to go back, and before you even bounce the ball, you're virtue signaling politics. Just, you cannot be serious. It's
the sort of the secular religion, and therefore it has to be relevant in terms of what it's doing. So it has to participate in the various religious activities of the culture. So that's simply the way that sports works now. So you're going to have to get used to it, Tim, or find something better than sports to enjoy.
The AFL, they still have leftover guilt from the Adam Goodes booing saga, because when his documentaries, the Final Quarter and the Australian Dream were released, the AFL put out a statement apologising for how they handled it at the time. Given that there are no fans at the moment, Adam Goodes could probably make a comeback. There's no fans there to boo him.
And the various protests that we had here in New Zealand, seem to. They've said that they're going to keep going with the Black Lives Matter, foreign import protests into New Zealand until something changes. It's not quite clear what needs to change in New Zealand exactly, but they have started to target statues and memorials in New Zealand as well. Although usually not the protesters directly, but kind of just online mobs and vague, even vague threats. And then you've got these woke councils that, rush to react, and the media need a different story to talk about. And we're in a cycle of fake outrage in New Zealand at the moment, where every single day there's something new to supposedly be upset about, and then you get to the bottom of the story of whatever this thing is named for, and you're like, oh, okay, well, there is in fact no reason for anybody to be upset.
Well, we've had one landmark name change confirm, that they're going to be getting rid of one name, and this is the King Leopold Rangers in WA, because it's named after King Leopold of Belgium, who, well, all historians agree was a brutal colonizer of the Belgian Congo during the scramble for Africa in the 19th century. A lot of the African colonization by the European powers was not brutal, even though there were conflicts. But yeah, nobody can deny that King Leopold, he was a brutal bastard. And given that he has no connection...
I have not come across anybody.
Yeah.
Who likes King Leopold.
And given that he had no connection to Australia, people are sort of saying, why is there the King Leopold ranges in the Kimberley region named after him? But it's sort of like, yeah, I agree that, like, you know, why is it named after this horrible historical person? But it's also the thing, the slippery slope. If we concede this, they're going to move on to the next thing.
You know that they'll never be happy with this. But yeah, nobody's going to actually protest the change of this. That is in fact a strange one. I have not come across anything in New Zealand quite like this. We have had things named after various different people, but usually there's been a local reason as to why the name has been picked, and I can't seem to. I suspect it would have been somehow a fan of his or something at the time, which can happen.
So from our Black Lives Matter protests, not last weekend, but the previous weekend, which was on Saturday, June the 6th. That's when the big ones happen nationwide. 2 coronavirus positive cases have come from people who attended that rally, both from the Melbourne one. They were potentially infectious at the time, but they wore PPE. So it's... A lot of people were fearing, though I think that the media was hyping that there'd be a second wave from these BLM protests. There's not going to be, but the reason people like myself were critical of them was the double standard that they were just allowed to go there. Victoria Police didn't do anything, even though the rules were still in place, and they aggressively shut down the Mother's Day anti-lockdown protest and hunted down the attendees of the Botanical Gardens anti-lockdown protest. Victoria Police did succumb.
And there was a lot of talk from people initially saying, "Oh no, the lockdown applies to everybody. It's equal, and we all have to abide by the rules, etc., etc." And the protests simply prove that was not the case. That was never the case.
So last weekend was BLM weekend 2, and on Friday night, the protesters they went for Captain Cook's statue in Hyde Park in Sydney, but they were stopped by New South Wales police, and also by a new statue protection organisation called Stand Up for Australia. This is the article written by Lucas Roses here. New South Wales Police defend Captain Cook statue from leftist mobs there.
And I saw some of these photos and they look amazing.
And David Shoebridge, the New South Wales Greens MLC, and everyone agrees that he's a communist. He just doesn't say it out loud. But once the official protest, Black Lives Matter protest, was over, 2 women returned to deface the statue. And one of them, this woman here, Jiaron Shi, is a part-time staffer for David Shoebridge. That's where he is there.
Of course.
And the other one, Charmaine Morris Mills, she works for the Women's Justice Network, and this is the new statue protection organisation, Stand Up for Australia. One of the members is Reg Penny, who's been a regular on the Uncockables, and he wrote this article, his first one for the Unshackled, which we were very pleased to publish his first article on our platform.
Very good. Nice. Nice to hear that. And meanwhile, somebody in my chat has guessed the name of the book behind me. So that's a first on the show. I don't know if it's easy to read from the distance that they're at, but I think somebody recognized the cover, so that's very good. And if you want to send through a super chat and have your comments read out, now's the time to do that. I do see there is a new one.
Yeah.
With a comment here for me from Simon, 25 New Zealand dollars. Dieuwe for Prime Minister. Well, thank you very much.
Well, you're running for election this September.
I am running for Parliament for MP. So we shall see there. I do not quite imagine myself ever becoming Prime Minister though, but there. Who knows? Never say never, I suppose.
Now let's turn to my home state and all of the Twitterati, the lockdown lovies that were saying what a wonderful job Daniel Andrews had done from saving the state from the coronavirus pandemic, even though this is where most of the new infections come from, although Victoria is leading the country in testing now. Local Marxist feminist Van Badham, a famous tweet of her, she scolded ABC Q&A host Hamish MacDonald for going too hard in questioning Daniel Andrews, saying he's got a halo over his head. Do not attack him. Well, there were explosive corruption claims that were aired by Channel 9's 60 Minutes on Sunday night, a joint investigation with the Age newspaper, where they had secret recordings and footage which revealed that State Labour Minister and power broker Adam Somyurek was bullying other members and MPs, branch stacking, not with actual people, but with fake members, and he was utilizing taxpayer-funded staffers to do it. This was a one-year investigation by Nine and The Age, which shows that the mainstream media, they're not dead yet when it comes to investigative journalism, because Nine Entertainment Co., which owns both The Age and Channel 9, obviously still got lots and lots of money, and they can afford to take all the heat which comes with an investigation. So he bragged, Adam Somyurek, in these secret recordings that he'd signed up 4,000 fake members, which equates to 25% of the Victorian ALP members being fake. And Daniel Andrews the next day announced that he'd been sacked from cabinet, and he decided to quit the Labor Party. And I noticed that all of Dan Andrews' cheer squad on Twitter were like, oh, see, Daniel Andrews has been decisive here. And, oh, what about Channel 9 and 60 Minutes going after LNP crooks? Because they were eager to highlight that the chairman of Nine Entertainment Co. is Peter Costello, former federal treasurer under the Howard government. So apparently it's a grand conspiracy by Peter Costello. He ordered 60 Minutes and the Age to do this year-long investigation. And Adam Somyurek, he had previously had to stand down from cabinet in 2015 after he bullied his female chief of staff. It's what they called in the thick of it, that British political satire, a strategic resignation, because he was allowed to come back into the cabinet after the 2018 state election, despite the fact that earlier in the year he got into a bust-up with a Labor factional rival, then Sports Minister John Erin, in the parliamentary kitchens in 2018, and then allegedly threatened him with a butter knife. And both Somniak and Erin, they were both born in Turkey. So this was a battle in the Vic Parliament between two Turks, which is a fun fact. But Somniak got promoted back into cabinet after the 2018 election, while John Erin got dumped. There's been further fallout. There was last night when an ally of Adam Somyurek, who was implicated in the taxpayer-funded branch stacking, Robin Scott, and Marlene Kuritz, she resigned this morning. They're both allies of him. And so they're going to be all investigated by the Independent Broad-Based Commission Against Corruption. It's called. It's got some weird name. But when a powerful fractional figure is taken down, and the secret recordings, he bragged about his power and that he could control who was premier, and he also used quite filthy language. He talked about physically hurting the domestic violence minister, and also called young Labor party members passive aggressive fags.
That sounds sound like lovely people.
Remember the party of women and gays.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually had somebody contact me just a few hours before the show, telling me that they had seen this stacking from the inside when they were over in Melbourne. They had been horrifically treated by members of the Young Labor Party in Australia. A lot of manipulation behind the scenes, veiled threats, incredibly toxic behavior, and the comment about them all being gay apparently is completely true as well.
So they're passive aggressive.
That are probably almost worse than that from the descriptions that I were given from this friend of mine. So that's that. We don't have anything in New Zealand that ever quite goes this far, and that is quite shocking. We did have some secret recordings leaked, a year or nearly 2 years ago now by Jamie Lee Ross, where the then leader of the opposition, Simon Bridges, was using quite foul language to describe his MPs. He was dropping some F-bombs. He said that one Chinese is better than two Indians, and just the things that they say behind the scenes when they think nobody is listening is quite telling.
The internal, you would say, wars in the Labor Party, they're much more vicious than those that happen in the Liberal and Conservative parties, because both have had leaks of private conversations. And yes, Somniac's language is way worse. But the thing about the left, they're very good at keeping their hatred towards each other a secret. That's always been the key to a lot of their success. But now the House of Cards, to use that expression, is starting to collapse now. And a lot of people were asking this secret footage and recordings, where did they come from? Closer examination of the footage has it's pretty easy to conclude that it was filmed in the offices of federal Labor MP for Holt, Anthony Byrne, and that's why no laws have been broken, because he or his staffers, because they were in the offices at the time, you're allowed to, under Victorian law, record conversations that you're a party to. And I think that's the law in New Zealand as well. That's right. That's why one of your former MPs, Todd Barclay, got into trouble because he recorded conversations which he was not involved in, which is illegal. But this is the reason why Anthony Byrne or his staffers are not likely to be in trouble. But Anthony Byrne, he's a federal MP. He is deputy chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Security and Intelligence, and he's taken it upon himself to surveil his fellow Labor MPs. And I know that allies of Mr. Somniac in the Labor Party have said that there should be an AFP Asia investigation.
This is and I'm sure that this is only the surface of the story. I think you'll. It sounds like the kind of thing that's ripe for some even bigger scandals to be unearthed, and Somehow I feel like the intelligence agencies at this point would kind of just be like, yeah, no thanks, we'll stay away from that.
When a factional power broker is taken down, somebody like Somniac, it's always an inside job because who has the most
and so
dirt
somebody
on
else
them?
who's and somebody else who will benefit in the end.
Because allegedly 25% of Victorian branch members are fake. The state division of the party is now of the Labor Party is now entered into a form of administration with former Victorian Premier Steve Bracks and former Federal Labor Minister Jenny Macklin coming in as administrators, and so they're going to suspend all pre-selections for the next term. So basically, all the sitting members get re-endorsed, which it's because apparently all the future pre-selections would be tainted. So grassroots members, they no longer get a say. The legit ones, not the fake branch stack ones. But their solution, federal Labor, is to just get the faceless men to decide all the future pre-selections. That sounds like a perfectly excellent solution to this problem.
Yeah. And there's actually sort of a very small scale story like this in New Zealand, where my former electorate of Manurewa, the sitting MP there was actually challenged, and they had a selection there, and one of the challengers forgot to file a paperwork before the election, and then somebody had support from all of the local members, but the Labour Party head office can essentially override the local members. And they did some kind of backroom deal where the MP was removed from her seat but given a safe position on the list. Like we have in New Zealand, you don't have to win an electorate to get into Parliament. And so there were all kinds of deals done there that were smoothed over so that the correct candidate was shuffled into place. And I've just seen a similar story today in the National Party, in the newly formed electorate next door, Takanini. They had the same situation where they tried to bring in, the head office tried to bring in their candidate and overrule, sort of do a pre-selection deal. And one of the sort of more powerful local figures ended up, they sort of underestimated him, and he managed to get the local candidate in, and all of this backroom politics going on, sort of next door to me, really, and it's quite entertaining to watch sometimes. But nothing truly damning coming out of it, just business as usual in politics.
Well, it was probably plausible for Daniel Andrews when he claims that he sacked Mr. Sonnier decisively, that he could. That he could plausibly claim that, it's just one bad apple and we've got rid of it. But now he's lost two further cabinet ministers, and he's been premier since 2014. He's been the leader of the Victorian Labor Party since 2010. He's been in for over a decade, and everyone's dragging out the Sergeant Schultz memes now, if we're still allowed to drag out those memes with his Photoshop face. I know nothing, even though exactly. I've been the state leader for a decade. Yeah. Because one of a federal Liberal MP, Andrew Laming, he got in trouble for putting Anastasia Palaszczuk's face on Sergeant Schultz. I know nothing because her ancestry is Polish and her grandfather was in a Nazi concentration camp. So even though Sergeant Schultz is a fake comedy character, it was offensive to.
Yeah. Of course, yeah. We had a few more to go back to our previous topic, which almost fits in quite well here, of the statues being removed and taken down. I'm going to get in a few more of those before we run out of time today. The whole saga started with the Bully Hayes Cafe, and somebody figured out that Bully Hayes was a slave trader in New Zealand. He traded Pacific slaves. He'd go to islands and then do kind of what you talked about earlier on the show with blackbirding, where he basically forced them to sign certain contracts that essentially made them slaves. And so, because slavery, was illegal in New Zealand and has been since New Zealand was formed, because it was outlawed throughout the British Empire before New Zealand became a state, a colony. And this cafe then very quickly announced that it was going to be renamed, which, there's a lot of people saying, sort of standing up saying, oh, there's no need for this cafe to rename it. But I thought, as soon as I heard it, I thought, this guy's just been shut down for 2 months on his cafe and he's bleeding out money. And what he needs right now is new customers. And so it's a good way to make some money is to rename his cafe to something a little bit more progressive and get the 21st century bourgeois to buy lots of soy lattes at his cafe. So it could be quite a good move to rename that one, and no real loss to New Zealand there. Then we got to a more bizarre one, which is the Captain Cook Hotel, which has now also announced that it's going to be renamed because Captain Cook was, a colonizer who
an explorer,
who killed people, and he was a horrible person. Which none of that is actually true. It's this one I think is a really sad one in that everything that Captain Cook did and everything that we have here in New Zealand and in Australia is essentially a result of Captain Cook's exploration. He, from all accounts, was a fairly nice guy. There were some unfortunate incidents that occurred. If you read his account of them and various other accounts, he was not malicious in any way. He didn't actually want anybody to die in the sometimes violent altercations that he had. Well, they were, his crew were looking for resources, and sometimes they were attacked. Obviously it comes from that hatred that the mob has for Captain Cook and for anything that's British and English and colonial. The idea is to reset the country to year zero, to the current day, and they don't want to have anything to do with the past. And Captain Cook is the ultimate I suppose incarnation of absolute, of the system that they hate, right? So it's a thing of like, it's not really Captain Cook they hate, but they hate absolutely everything that he represents, even though that is the very reason they exist. The business owner probably is in a similar situation where renaming it will make him more money. That's what happens. Then we moved on to Hamilton. We're a town from Hamilton, about an hour south of Auckland.
Yeah, famous town.
And a city town, the Tron, various names. And this had a statue. It was actually a very recent statue put there in 2013, a bronze statue donated by a local company as financially very successful. And they said, okay, we're going to donate a statue after the guy who this town is named out of. And then now, a week ago, somebody threatened it, saying this guy was a murderer and a colonizer, and it had to be removed. And then the council removed it like within a few hours, basically. And then people were like, who's Captain Hamilton? Obviously people started looking into his life.
The Streisand effect, as it's called.
Yeah, and then it turns out that he was not, he was in fact and give me a second, just need to this stuff. So I've got to do my own moderation at the moment. Give me a second.
Haven't your critiquers and nitpickers, none of them are moderators?
No, a few of them, but actually all of my moderators were somehow busy tonight, so I have to find a few others. I could somebody let me know in the chat if they want to be a moderator, and I will give you a promotion. And we've got planes flying overhead too. I know that's gone back to normal now, but we did have a few shows where there weren't supposed to be any planes, and we had planes flying overhead every 5 minutes during the middle of the lockdown. So people started looking into Captain Hamilton, and he was just a British naval captain who, was a well-decorated soldier in the Navy. He had been stationed to New Zealand. He'd only been here for maybe a few months. How much he'd actually stepped foot on the actual land of New Zealand is not really that well known, but he was called in to help with a military engagement in Tauranga, and there was a very clever chief there who had set up basically an ambush. He had built a trap to draw the British out of their redoubts, and he built a gate Pa, which was incredibly well fortified, and the British bombarded it. They thought, oh yes, we'll do the usual thing, we bombard it, and then we go in and clean up. But in reality, the bombardment had done no damage at all. One of my moderators just arrived in the chat as well. He did say good timing. Yes, that's true. That timing indeed. The statue, so of this man, and he was just called in to be part of this engagement. The first wave charged in to the fortification. They basically were shot to pieces, and that's when he jumped up and he said, "Follow me, man!" And he was shot like 2 seconds later, but he sort of rallied the troops, and they managed to run away, and it was a big defeat for the British, right? And that's this guy's story. And later on, his regiment was stationed in the Waikato, and they built a fort in the middle of a swamp that they were protecting along the river, and they named the fort in his honor, so it was named Hamilton. And that's the story. That's the rest. The rest is history, where eventually the swamp is drained and the farmers move in and it becomes a big city. So this guy did nothing wrong, and in fact, very few people know who he was. And it's only now that his statue's been removed. And like I said, it only been there for 7 years, and it wasn't even really about him that it was there in the first place. So this basically, this poor guy is again comes back to part of the system, and that's why they got to remove the statue. Now they're like, oh, should we rename the town? And on it goes. And you're like, but this guy did nothing wrong, but because he was British, because he was English, because he was part of the whiteness, as they like to call it.
White statue bad.
He was white, yeah. So basically, his crime was that he was too white, and that's the end of Captain Hamilton.
Well, some of our peak Year Zero stupidity, I think this has been exaggerated by the media. They're saying there's a campaign to rename Coon cheese, which is one of our iconic Australian cheese brands, and it's been around for forever. They've had advertising campaigns where they've emphasized the Coon name, and it comes from its US creator who formulated the Coon ingredients, Edward William Coon. And the old joke was, if you go over to the States, don't ask for crackers and Coon. Maybe we should name crackers because that's offensive too.
And it's the name, and I don't think I would have immediately connected it with the name if I hadn't. It's the case of that these people who are totally not racist, who managed to spot all of the most racist things to draw your attention to them. And again, like you said, there's no connection to anything nefarious there, But they make it so, right? They are so race obsessed that everything must be somehow connected to their overarching narrative on oppressors and oppression and critical race theory.
This campaign was launched by Australian gay comedian Josh Thomas. He tweeted, "Hey Australia, are we still chill with this?" with a photo of Coon tasty cheese. And obviously people rightly gave it to him, pointing out that it's named after William Edward Coon. And he replied, "It's amazing the respect people have for the name of a man who invented a processing technique of cheese, who died in 1934, and the disrespect they have for black people." Well, you do know that Mr. Coon had descendants, given that he was a man, and there's probably a lot of his descendants with the surname Coon.
They have to be renamed too. They've got to go. They've all got to go.
Or just what are they going to change their name to? Cheesy. But it's Josh Thomas is had a bit of a what you call lefty blowback because a clip has resurfaced of him at some comedian panel where because his most famous show, Please Like Me, he was talking about how he wanted to hire more diverse actors, but not enough of them had enough experience. So he basically admitted that he was perpetuating that you should only employ white actors because they're the ones with experience, which I look at that and say, how do you expect new actors to get like experience breakthrough if you're not willing to give them? And then if they've got minor roles, why do they need to have such experience? So he's had to apologize for that comment for perpetuating the White Actors Guild.
Yeah. There have been a lot of weird blunders like that by people attempting to virtue signal and doing so incredibly badly. And watching it blow up in their face is actually the most humorous of this entire saga. Even though, like I said, some certain elements of it are very, very sad, like obviously the Coon family and their brand being shamed, and same thing with Captain Hamilton being targeted. And then there's other ones that you didn't know anything about, like we had two towns I'll just briefly mention here, one called Picton, and apparently it was named after a slave trader who never set foot in New Zealand, except nobody ever knew that this town was named after anybody. In fact, that's news to me. So now I know something which I suppose, I mean, more knowledge, you know. But yeah, they're going to rename the town. I mean, yeah, good luck with that. What I did hear today from Mark Stein, again, I was listening to one of his shows, and says what they do is they find somebody who's got the same name, and they pass a name change of the town to rename it to the same name for a different person, which is quite a funny situation. So if you can find anybody named Picton who was perfect, you could rename the town after them. And the funniest one that I have to finish with is a little town called Cromwell. And of course, you know where this one is going to go, the evil Cromwell who murdered all of the Irish. And then his town's got to be renamed because it's named after the evil Cromwell. And then you find out the reason the town was named such is because the surveyor was Irish, and he was Northern Irish. And he had some trouble with some miners who were traveling through the area, and they were Southern Irish, and they didn't pay him his money for his surveying work. And so, as a curse, he said to them, "I give you the curse of the Irish," and he named the town Cromwell. So the anti-Irish, the town that now needs to be renamed for being racist to the Irish, was named it by an Irishman who was being racist to the Irish.
We've, I think, educated our audience throughout the show that how persecuted and discriminated the Irish were in our colonial nations. They're the ones who should be getting quite irate. But I think they've just
reparations for the Irish.
Yeah, they've just adopted the mantra "success is the best revenge." I mean, they're an incredibly wealthy country now, Ireland, and looking at the rest of the destitute Western nations and say, well, who's on top now? Exactly. There was a hilarious episode. Was it The Simpsons or Family Guy where they go to Ireland thinking it's still to be like a drunken cesspool, and it's like this modern global technological place, and they're bamboozled by it.
It is absolutely amazing, incredible what the Irish have done everywhere. And if you look at the history as to what the Irish have gone through, is indeed a good model for everyone else to follow. And I do think there are many groups who want to follow that, but they have been co-opted by these professional. I'm in fact not really sure what to call them, but
communists.
Communists.
That's what I've been.
Didn't want to use
them.
the word communist, but that's what they are. They follow Marxist derivative theories of, or sometimes people call it neo-Marxism. I suppose Frankfurt School, Gramsci, and it's all about oppression and oppressors. And they basically had these. A small group of these professionals sell the tribal leaders this idea that, hey, if you can talk about how oppressed you can be, then you can get rich and screw everybody else, and you'll be better off, and you don't have to work hard anymore. And that's the narrative that they've been sold. That's the ideology they've been sold, and that's incredibly tragic as to the effects that it has had and continues to have on people. And we definitely do need to keep educating people about that. And there has to be more pushback, and that has to be that absolutely just sad ideology has to be defeated, and then there can be greater prosperity for everybody.
I forgot to mention when we're talking about modern offence taking, during the Black Lives Matter protest in Sydney on Friday night, a New South Wales police officer was photographed doing the OK sign. And of course, this means that there's a systemic white supremacist, racist culture in the New South Wales police. When the New South Wales police have already said the officer involved, he just meant okay, which is what it always means.
Okay.
Because he saw people.
This is not the first time.
Yeah.
I think this is the third or fourth time on the short. We haven't been running the show that long. We have had numerous stories of Australian police officers doing the okay.
Yeah, there was the Victorian police officer during the mining conference blockade in Melbourne. Did the OK sign, I think, after they'd been pepper sprayed or something, and sort of was wanting to signal are you okay after that. But this New South Wales police officer, he was actually doing it because he saw people working out in the gym. There was a whole bunch of them walking across, and obviously he was happy that people were getting fit again, and so just did that. And of course, world leaders, mental health campaigns have all done the OK sign. I got a flyer in the letterbox a couple of weeks back from a small business insurance agency, and to advertise that they were good, they had one of their customers doing the OK sign.
They use dog whistling and trying to get all of the secret all of the secret racists to buy insurance with them. That's the evil plan you missed, Tim.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, it is a bit of a crazy world that we live in. It has been a fun show, really, even though you have to laugh at the craziness, really, and that's the only way to deal with it and to process it. And this again, statues can be rebuilt and replaced, and it's not really that big of a deal. And there are a lot more people now who are just waking up to the madness, which is good to see. If hopefully they will stay awake, then we can get somewhere.
We've had our federal parliament back for its second week, so it's good that parliament is sitting regularly again. When it was announced, when everyone thought the pandemic was going to wreck Australia, or it has wrecked us economically, but didn't wreck us health-wise. It wasn't going to sit federal parliament until August, but it's been well and truly back. The Morrison government, they've been wanting to push through, and it looks like passing mandatory minimum sentences for online and tourist pedophiles, because that has been something that the AFP has been focused on, and it was put into disturbing focus last week when there was an ex-Greens candidate in the seat of Cook, Jonathan Doig, who was arrested. It was granted bail. He had paid for over 10 years the sum of nearly $130,000 to 97 not beneficiaries, you'd say, pedophile enablers, pedophile child pornography producers in the Philippines, almost over 10 years. So he ran in the seat of Cook against Prime Minister Scott Morrison at the last federal election. He'd been a perennial Greens candidate in state and federal elections. The Greens announced that they had suspended his membership. He was a software engineer at the University of New South Wales. Then on Monday, it was announced that convicted pedophile and former New South Wales Labor Minister Milton Orcopoulos is facing more sexual assault charges. He'd already been in jail for 11 years. So police allege that Okopoulos sexually indecently assaulted 2 boys known to him on separate occasions in the 1990s in Lake Macquarie on the mid-north coast. He's been refused bail, but it just goes to show that the battle against child exploitation, child pornography, and pedophilia, it's a constant battle. And when you have aspiring politicians and those who were state cabinet ministers being charged with it, it puts the battle into focus.
And I see that the news story you just had up before aptly had a link to a video about Prince Charles beneath that. Whether that was intentional, I don't know.
Prince Andrew.
Was it Prince Andrew? Sorry, that's the one. I should not get the princes mixed up. Yes, well, we know. I mean, we have briefly talked about this on the show before, and it often is in the case of power. Then there is more desire to have the things that they can't have, and usually it is the absolute worst of humanity that comes out. We see more and more the removal of the traditional values that we had, the removal of Christianity, the animosity towards it, and we see more and more the increase of an absolute lawlessness and an absolute disregard for anything sacred or wholesome.
Yes, it's certainly 2020. It's been a horror of a year. So, in a twisted sense, you can understand why people want a reset. But no, we shouldn't wipe out all of human history just because we've had a bad year. But
any society that loses its past has no future. If you constantly are out there to destroy the past, and you're bound to forget it. And there are plenty of places we can see around the world that have done that, where they've destroyed all memory of bad things that have happened, and they've gone and just done it all over again.
Well, that wraps us up for this Trad Tuesday edition of Trad Tasman Talk. As we indicated at the start of the show, we'll be back again at the old special time. It's the Trad time.
Yes,
literally.
So we will be back. That's right. We will be back next Tuesday, same time, 7 p.m. Melbourne, 9 p.m. Auckland time, and then after that we'll probably go back to the Fridays, but that will be announced next week. So thank you to everyone who's still tuned in, and it's been great to have everybody in the chat. Thank you to those who sent through super chats and all of your support, and everyone who
we've been
got the announcement to be here.
It's been great. The last couple of Trad Tasman talks and last episodes of the Uncockables, a lot of super chats, which indicates that economic conditions are improving because obviously with the coronavirus lockdown, not surprisingly, people wanting to save money, our super chats dried up, but they're well and truly back now. So thank you so much to
absolutely
our
appreciate
supporters.
Yes. Appreciate those who actually go and pay for the things that they value, especially in conservative media. We have the same thing in New Zealand, and I see a few more New Zealand conservatives picking up sort of subscription models and encouraging people to pay for the content that they want to see to help combat the very, very far left-leaning narrative that they get from the mainstream and from so many different mega corporations online. And it's been a very good show. I myself have been back to writing, so there's actually a new article on rightminds.nz for the first time in a couple of months, and one from Tani who was in the chat today as well. I'm not sure if she's still watching, but those are finally up on the website, and there will be I've got a long backlog of the show still to put on there, but
yes,
I am writing some more articles. I am writing some more articles. I'm doing some more book reviews. I'm finally catching up with my reading again, and it's all going well. And
because you can buy books again.
That's right. The book ban has ended finally, and so yeah, it's going well. And people, thank you very much for your support.
Yeah, and we've got a few new contributors at the Unshackled.net who we've recently published. It's fantastic to have them on board. The site is publishing much more written content again now, which is great, which means that we're getting the balancing act right between our publications and our show productions. And of course, I'll be back tomorrow night, Wilmsfront, 6:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the Wilmsfront YouTube channel. It's going to be another double feature. I've got local filmmaker Paul Motor on to talk about, the wiping online of politically incorrect shows. I'm going to be displaying tomorrow night. You can't see it in frame at the moment, my banned DVD collection, because I feel that there's going to be a massive panic buying at probably our biggest DVD retailer is JB Hi-Fi. I think you have them in New Zealand as well, don't you? JB Hi-Fi.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
They're up and running. They're sort of one of the few stores like that are still up and running. But they've sort of branched out to like all different kinds of electronics.
Yes, they sell a lot of TVs and appliances as well. So it's obviously we had Little Britain, we had Chris Lilly, and even Faulty Towers being wiped online. So that I know that Margot in the chat, she went and panic bought Faulty Towers DVDs. So I think DVDs are going to make a comeback now, because if we're at the mercy of Netflix, Stan, or Amazon to see the great works of film and comedy, if they can take it away from us, then that's a very sad thing. Yeah.
I absolutely agree with what you say. And when my wife started buying all of the Paw Patrol CDs for the kids, like months or even years ago, I sort of was like, "Oh, you're crazy! Everything's online. It's fine." And now I'm like, "Oh, what a great idea! These will be wiped. These will be put into the memory hole by the end of the month."
Are your children, I'm not sure if they watch SpongeBob SquarePants?
No, we don't do that here.
Because apparently he's going to come out as a gay.
Yes, I did see that. I did see that reported, and I did see the people point out as well the fact that they had previous episodes where he was it married to Sandy or whatever.
Yeah. So he's had the hots for Sandy. Yeah.
It's all anyway.
Yeah.
SpongeBob is not sophisticated enough for my children. We prefer things like like Paw Patrol and
it's a kids comedy program, SpongeBob.
Sophisticated,
but it is actually the formula of the show. It's a rip-off of Bert and Ernie, because Squidward, who he's annoyed by SpongeBob's immaturity, and that's exactly how the Bert and Ernie sketches are. Ernie was the immature one, Bert was the serious, boring one. So it's not even original SpongeBob.
The indoctrination of kids, and I'm saying this as we've gone like 15 minutes over time, but obviously that's where the target audience is, the indoctrination of children at a very young age. And I encourage everyone who has young children, especially, or who's planning to have children, you take some responsibility there. Get them good content, teach them good things, support your local Christian schools, local or homeschool groups or whatever it is you're going to get involved in, and make sure they have good friends, good wholesome content, and good education. And that is going to be the most important thing in the next decades, and as we see a traditional resurgence.
And for the second half of Wilmsfront on Wednesday, I've got returning our contributor Lucas Roses, who writes all the exposés on our local Marxist Antifa. He's going to be exposing, the ones behind the new extreme Black Lives Matter movements here. And it's also, our own version of Background Briefing, which is an ABC radio program which did a I listened to it today. It was an appalling radio episode on the far right exploiting anti-Asian sentiment during the coronavirus pandemic, and it was so appalling that if you their spin on it was, if you criticize China in any way, then it's based on race.
Yeah.
And like, I was just like, I was so mad when I heard it. It's like, how can you like put this together like with this deliberate bias in it?
And that, well, you know where the money comes from, don't you?
Yeah, but it's just like, how can, like, there's a whole production team, and it's like, how can you not know that you're pushing an agenda, or like, how can you think that this is journalism? But that show,
it's propaganda. It's what it is.
That show is one of the worst, that ABC Background Briefing, because they did the expose on who they thought David Clarkson was, who does the exposures on all the far left Facebook trolls who harass patriots and conservatives online, and did the Alex Manlett, the original story on Lad Society members who joined the New South Wales Young National Party. So it's a shocker of a program. And
we are now well and truly overtime on the longest outro ever. So I'm gonna wrap this up right now and say good night, everyone. We'll see you next week. We will pick this up next Tuesday, and thank you to those of you who have stuck around. Everyone's got to get to bed, get ready for work tomorrow, and keep the economy going. And we will be here next week.
Yep. For the last time, see you next Tuesday.
Good night. Stay safe, stay free.